So in this video, I am going to going over how to log in with Google and also be able to fetch a protected URL on the front end. So here's a demo. Basically, I just have two buttons, and what I do is you can click the button to log in with Google. And once you are logged in with Google, you can click Fetch Protected, and you're able to see a response right here. Let's start making this application from scratch. Okay, so the first thing that you do is you head over to the GitHub page down below and clone this project. Once you clone this project, you will have these files here, and the backend application and the front-end application, and we have a README file. So the first thing that we should do is you want to create a virtual environment first. So Python 3-m venv and venv, and then you want to source the virtual environment. Now you want to run python manage.py run server. So in this case, we need to first pip install django-restframework. Okay, once this is installed, let's do run server again. And it's telling us that we have 19 unapplied migration. So why don't we apply a migrate command to create all the tables and then do a run server command. Okay, so now the backend server is running. Let's move over to the front end. So let's go to our front end application and run npm install. After that, run npm run dev to start the front end application. So now if you head over to the localhost 5173, okay, there we go. Inspect, zoom in on this app. So pretty much we have just two buttons. The current custom login with Google is not working, and we have a fetch protected button. If we click on it right now, it has a cross origin request blocked error. So to fix the cross origin error, let's stop our server, and then we need to run pip install. In this case, we're going to run pip install Django course headers. This library will help us resolve that error. Once we've done that, you want to open up your backend project, go to your settings file, and then in your installed app, you want to add the library that we just installed. And this should be called course headers, I believe. And also in your middleware, you want to add the course middleware. Lastly, you want to also add the course origin whitelist, and then you want to make sure you add your localhost. And to also, we can also add our IP address in here to just make sure. Okay, once this is set, then let's start our server one more time, and then let's go back to our front-end application to see if we can fetch the protected API. So currently this API is actually not protected since we haven't set up the button yet, but let's see if it works. In this case, when we click on the button, we're able to fetch the API, and you see there's nothing in our data. So what we can do is we can go into Django admin and set this up. To set this up, first we need to create a super user. So stop your server and let's create a super user. Use the create super user command, and I'm just going to name it admin. Okay, once this is set up, then we can run server again. Now go to the admins page and then log in as whatever username and password that you set. From here, let's go to our to-dos model, and then we can add a few to-dos. Let's see, watch TV and work out. Okay, so now if we go back and fetch this protected API again, you see that now there's two objects in this array, watch TV and work out. Like I mentioned, this is actually not a protected API yet. So since now this button works, now let's actually add the logic to make this API to be protected, and it will require authentication in order to access this API. To do that, let's go back to our backend code and open up our views to do /views file, and let's import is authenticated from the REST framework permissions class or file. And then in our view, we need to add the permission classes and then set it to be is authenticated. So this means that this view now will require authentication in order to be able to get access to it. So save this file and then go back to the front end one more time and then click on this button. Before I do that, I'm going to clear out the console. If you hit fetch again, you will get an error saying that authentication credential were not provided. So that means that right now this API is protected. So in order to access it, we have to set up the authentication. And in this case, we will be using Google as our authentication system. To do Google login with vue3, we're going to install this library, the vue3-google-login library. And if you just follow the documentation, we're going to be using the Google auth code login function since we're doing the authorization code flow. And in this case, you want to use the code here. And in this case, we'll just copy this and paste it into our code. I will close my backend file and then open up the apps.vue file in the front end. And at the top of our script, I'm going to paste that in here and make sure that in our button, we need to add the click and set this click to be the name of the function login. So now when we click on the button, custom login with Google, it will trigger this. This function here. Now, before this will work, we also need to do some other setup. If you go to the prerequisite, you want to make sure you have this installed. So let's actually install that right now. Let's turn off our front end server and then npm install the library. Once that's installed, then we need to also add this code in our entry file in man.js. So open up your man.js and basically replace this with what we just copied. I'm going to delete this. And one last thing, you want to paste your Google client code, client ID in here. And in this case, this tutorial assumes that you already have the Google API console credentials set up. So you already have your client ID and secret key. So you just have to copy your client ID in here. In this case, I'm going to paste mine in here. And by the time this video is published, this client ID will be invalid since I'm going to delete the keys that I made on Google console. Okay, so once this is set, you can save all your files and then run npm, run dev again. Now go to your front end application and you can try to click on the button, custom login with Google, and then you shall see a pop-up that's asking you to choose an account and then go through with the process, hit continue. Then you will be able to see in your console that you get a response with the code as the response data. And this code will be the code in the authorization code flow that we're going to use to exchange for access and refresh token in our backend. Now that we have this code, we will need to send this code to our backend. And in this case, we don't have that backend API set up yet. So the next step will be setting up that backend API so that we can handle this code exchange. So I'm going to close my front end application for now and then start working on backend API that will help us do the code exchange. To handle the code exchange, we will be using the library dj-rest-auth in our backend. We need to pip install dj-rest-auth. And in this case, we specifically want to install the version 7.0.0. And the reason we downloaded that version is because dj-rest-auth also depends on the django-auth library. And we also need to install django-auth. In this case, we want to install the version 0.57.0. Basically, these two versions are compatible with each other, and that's why I am using those specific versions. If you download the latest package of those two libraries, you will run into errors. But if you look up on their respective GitHub issue page, you might be able to find a solution to work around it. So once I have those two libraries installed, we can start setting up our backend. To do that, we can head over to the dj-rest-auth documentation and just start following the documentation. So in this case, we've installed dj-rest-auth. In our installed app, we need to include these apps. Let's do that first. Open up your settings file, go to your installed app, and then install, and then include the apps that we just copied. And after that, we want to add this URL pattern. And I'm going to add this URL pattern in core/urls.py. And make sure you save all your files. And before we run the migrate command, I'm going to run this a bit later since I'm going to add a few more settings. In this case, we are not doing registration since we're only going to use login with Google. Therefore, we can skip this step since we're going to be using Google authentication. So we need to add these. So before we do this, we'll just find the one for Google. and then make sure to include all these apps that's needed. Again, go to your settings and include those apps. Once you've done that, then what you can do is you can try to do a migrate command. So if you try migrate, and you'll see that there's an error, duplicate REST framework. Okay, so when we did a copy and paste, we have 2 REST frameworks in here. So I'm going to delete one of them, and then we'll try this again. Okay, and then also we see this error here, dj-rest-auth Django. This is because I forgot a comma here on line 43. So I need to add a comma there. Now let's do migrate one more time. And now there's another error saying that all auth account middleware must be added. So let's also add that. Go to your middleware section and then add the all auth account middleware at the very bottom. Once we save that, let's try to run the migrate command one more time. Okay, now there's no more errors and all the necessary tables was able to get created. So once all the tables been created, I'm going to close down my settings file and open up my views.py to do views.py file and start adding the necessary views that's needed for Google login. So as you can see, I am just copying these code from documentation into my file, and then make sure you add all the imports. And in this case, the callback URL. Oh, and also since we're doing the authorization code grant, we don't need this class here. That's for implicit grant. So for the callback URL, from my research, all we have to do is set this to be post message. And as to why, I can post a link in the description to that further gives detail on why we do this. After we've done that, then let's go back to our documentation and add the URL pattern. In this case, since I am working with to-dos views.py, I'm also going to add my URLs in the to-do.urls.py and make sure to import Google login. So once that is done, then now we've set up the URL that can actually use to exchange the access token and refresh token. And however, we still need another endpoint that can receive the code value that we got from the front end and then trigger this API to do the code exchange. So let's do that right now. Okay, so to do this, let's go to to-do/views.py and then make all the imports that's necessary to make this new API. We'll first create a new class called Google Code Exchange View. From there, we'll make it a post request, and we'll first get the code value from our front end through the request data. From there, we can print that out and then set the URL to be the URL that was specified for this view. And this is going to be the URL that we're going to use to exchange for tokens. And from there, we'll make a post request to the URL that we set with the necessary data, which is the code. And from there, if the status is 200 OK, then we will get the access token from the response and also the refresh token from the response. Then we will set the response, the return response for this API to just display a simple message saying that it was able to get the tokens. And after that, we're going to set the JWT access token in the cookie and also do the same thing with setting the JWT refresh cookies in the cookies as well. And from there, we can return the response. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that since we are setting the JWT access tokens, we also need to set up JWT authentication instead. Because currently, if you look at our settings.py, for the library dj-rest-auth, by default, it uses auth token. So we need to go back to the documentation and scroll all the way down and follow these instructions here to set up the JWT authentication. The first thing that we need to do is we need to download this simple JWT library. And let's do that first. So let's do a pip install django-restframework simple JWT. After that's installed, we will create the REST framework section in our settings.py and remove the ... So now we have this default authentication class is set to JWT cookie authentication. Then we want to also make sure the rest-auth setting is using JWT. And from there, since we're using JWT, then we want to define the name of our access token and refresh token. So in this case, I just use the default name that they provided. And a few more settings that we want to add is the JWT-auth SAM site and JWT-auth secure. Set this to none and true. And since we are going to be using cookies, what we need to do is we need to set the credentials to be true as well. So in this case, I'm setting the course allow credentials equal to true. So once this is set, what we can do is we can start our server again and double check our front end. Let's go to app. Let's go to our app.vue file. And now in the front end here, we need to add more logic so that when the login with Google button is clicked on, then we need to send a post request with the code to the to the view that we just set up here. Okay. And one thing that I forgot to mention, since we set up this view here, we also need to go to the urls.py, todos.urls.py, and set up the URL. So in this case, I'm just simply setting it to be called Google-Code Exchange, and that points to the Google Code Exchange view, and we need to import that. Okay, so now that's set up. Now we can go back to our app.vue and set up this logic here. So we will be making a post request to this URL, Google Code Exchange, and if it is successful, then we'll say login success, and if it fails, then we'll say login fails. So once this is set up, run, save this code, and make sure your backend and frontend server are running. Then go back to the web browser, and I'll just refresh this page one more time. Log in with Google again, and it says login failed. Okay, so let's go back to our backend server. Let's see what happened here. Okay, as you can see, the error is saying that request is not defined. Okay, so I think we forgot to install the requests library. So let's install that. Now let's run our server one more time. Log in our browser one more time. See what other errors that's going to pop up. Okay, another error popped up. Login failed. Request is not defined. Okay, so in this case, I believe that we forgot to import request. So I'm going to do import requests. Okay, save that, refreshes, log in one more time. Okay, it failed again. Okay, so this expects a response HTTP. So let's see what went wrong here. Right, okay, so if the status is 200 okay, then we will return a 200 okay response. However, we forgot to cover the part is that we forgot to cover the part where it is not a 200 okay status. Then what do we do? So in this case, if it is not a 200 okay response, then we're going to also just create a return statement where it says that detail error bad request exchange token with Google, and this can be a 400 status. Let's try this one more time. Okay, login failed again. Let's see, bad request. Okay, so it says site model site does not exist, site matching query does not exist. So this means that we need to set up the site in our Django admins page for our application. So let's go to the admin page, refresh, and you'll see that there is a social account section. So in your social account, let's see. Oh, first in the sites, make sure you change the example.com to your IP address. Save that, and then go to your social app section, and then add social app. In this case, provider is Google. You can skip provider ID, and then you can give it a name, Django test app, and you want to enter your client ID here, and then you want to enter the secret key, and from there you want to add this site to the chosen sites. And I believe that should be all the settings here, and hit save. Now you have this. Let's try this again. Let's try to run server again, and go to our app, log in with Google, and then continue. Login failed one more time. Site ID setting. Okay, so we need to set the site ID in our settings. So site ID, set that equal to 1. Let's try this again. Saved. Login with Google. Okay, now we see a login success message here, and you can see that now we have we have a response here where it says able to get the tokens. Okay, now we're logged in successfully. That means that it should have entered this if statement and also set our JWT and refresh cookie. So if we go to our browser, and look at the cookie section, you wouldn't see the access token and refresh token here, right? So we need to fix that. And one of the issue that I can see right now is that we're using localhost instead of the IP address. And the reason this could be an issue is because when we set the cookies, currently in the front-end app, in our apps.vue, we are making a post request to the to the IP address instead of localhost. So that means that the cookie is going to be set on the IP address domain instead of the localhost domain. And then another thing that we need to do is that in the front end, we need to make sure that we are adding the with credentials to true in each Axios request or post request. So let's do that right now. Let's add that. So now we are setting the with credentials equal to true in our post requests, and save that, and then try this again. Going to refresh, log in with Google, and you'll see that in our console, it says login successful, right? So now if we check our storage cookies, you'll see that the access token is there. It's called my app, and then my refresh. Currently, my refresh is empty. It's because our backend settings, it only sets the access token value so far. So this means that we have successfully authenticated ourselves, so that if we click on this fetch protected button, we should be able to fetch the protected API. So when we click on this, it was able to give us an API response with the correct data. So that means we've successfully authenticated ourselves using Google, and we were able to fetch a protected API endpoint. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.